we praise Him, we seek His aid, and we ask for His forgiveness. Dear students, I would like to welcome you in lecture number 11, and today we will talk about first language acquisition. We will define the meaning, or we will know the meaning of acquisition and the input and the stages of acquisition, and then after that the morphology development, syntax development, and forming questions and negatives, and what happens when an infant or a child starts speaking. Now, first of all, let us just define acquisition. Now, the process of language acquisition has some basic requirements. Now, during the first 2 or 3 years of development, a child requires interaction with other language users in order to bring the general language capacity into contact with a particular language, such as English. The child must be physically capable of sending and receiving sound signals in a language. All infants first make cooing by saying coo, coo. So all infants make cooing and bubbling, b, b. Infants start making cooing and bubbling noises during the first year. But congenitally, deaf infants stop after 6 months. Input. Now, under normal circumstances, human infants are certainly helped in their language acquisition by the typical behavior of older children and adults in the home environment, who provide language examples or language samples or input for the child. Adults such as mom, dad, and the grandparents tend not to address the little creatures before them as if they are involved in normal adult-to-adult conversation. Now, there does seem to be a lot of this, oh, goody, now daddy, push, choo-choo. Now, the characteristically simplified speech style adopted by someone who spends a lot of time interacting with a young child is called as caregiver speech. Baby talk child's environments, they start saying choo-choo, poo-poo, pee-pee, wawa. These are the sounds which are generally done by the children or infants. Now, building into a lot of caregiver speech is a type of conversational structure that seems to assign an interactive role to the young child even before he or she becomes a speaking participant. If we look at an extract from a speech of a mother to her child aged 1 year and 1 month, as if it were a two-party conversation between a mother and a child, then this type of structuring becomes apparent. Notice how the mother reacts to the child's actions and vocalizations as if they were turns into conversation. Now, mother says, look, and here she points at something, a picture. Now, a child touches a picture or pictures. Now, mother says, what are those? Now, a child vocalizes and just b and smile. Now, mother again say, there are rabbits. A child vocalizes, smiles, and look up at mother. Mother laughs. Yes, rabbit. And again, the child repeats the same action, vocalizes, smiles, b, using b, and then the mother says yes, and she laughs. Now, this a kind of conversation seems to be a real conversation between a mother and her child, but in fact, it's not. But this is the way we enforce, and it's a kind of input of the mother to her child, encouraging and speaking with the child just to push him up, to force him to speak. Now, there are some stages for acquisition, starting with cooing and bubbling. The earliest use of speech-like sounds has been described as cooing. During the first few months of life, the child gradually becomes capable of producing sequence of vowel-like sounds, particularly high vowels similar to A, and so on. By 4 months of age, the developing ability to bring the back of the tongue into regular contact with the back of the palate allows the infant to create sounds similar to velar sounds like K or G. Hence, the common description as cooing or going for this type of production. Now, speech perception studies have shown that by the time they are 5 months old, babies can already hear the difference between the vowels E and A, or E and A, and discriminate between syllables like B, G, T, and so on. Now, between 6 and 8 months, the child is sitting up and producing a number of different vowels and consonants, as well as combinations such as B, 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 O, T, 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 G, 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 and combination of sounds, consonants. Now, this type of sound production is described as bubbling. In the later bubbling stage, around 9 to 10 months, there are recognizable intonation patterns to the consonant and vowel combinations being produced, as well as variation of the combinations, such as saying, for example, B, B, O, B, B, D, D, B, 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 T, B, G, B, D, and so on. Now, nasal sounds also become more common, and certain syllable sequences such as M, 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 O, D, D, D are occurred and interpreted by parents as versions of mama. When a child, for example, says B, 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 now it is the same pattern or a version when parents say mama or dada, and repeat it back to the child. Now, as children begin to pull themselves into a standing position during the 10th and 11th months, they become capable of using their vocalizations to express motions and emphasis. This late babbling stage is characterized by more complex syllable combinations like ma, da, ga, ba, a lot of sound play and attempted imitations. Now, this pre-language use of sound provides the child with some experience of the social role of speech, because adults tend to react to the babbling, however incoherent, as if it is actually the child's contribution of social interactions. Moving to the second stage, which is called as one-word stage. Now, this stage is between 12 and 18 months. Children begin to produce a variety of recognizable single-unit utterance. This period, traditionally called the one-word stage, which is characterized by speech in which signal terms are uttered for everyday objects such as milk, cookie, cat, cup, and spoon. Now, other forms such as us may occur in circumstances that suggest the child is producing a version of what's that. So, the label one word for this stage may be misleading, and the terms such as single unit, as a single unit, would be more accurate. We sometimes use the term holophrastic, meaning a single form functioning as a phrase or sentence to describe an utterance that could be analyzed as a word, a phrase, or a sentence. Now, while many of these holophrastic utterances seem to be used to name objects, they may be also produced in circumstances that suggest the child is already extending their use. An interbed may elect the name of a sister who normally sleeps in the bed, even in the absence of the person name. During this stage, then the child may be capable of referring to Karen and bed, but is not yet ready to put the forms together to produce a more complex phrase. Well, it is a lot to expect from someone who can only walk with a stagger and has to come downstairs backwards. Next stage is two-word stage. Now, the word two stage can begin around 18 to 20 months as the child's vocabulary moves beyond 50 words. Now, by the time the child is 2 years old, a variety of combinations similar to baby chair, mommy eat, cat bad will usually have appeared. The adult interpretation of such combinations is, of course, very much tied to the context of their utterance. The phrase baby chair may be taken as an expression of position. This is baby's chair, or as a request, put baby in chair, or as a statement, baby is in the chair, depending on different circumstances. Now, whatever it is that the child actually intends to communicate through such expressions, the significant functional consequences are that the adult behaves as if communication is taking place, a real communication. That is, the child not only produces speech but also receives feedback confirming that the utterance worked as a contribution to the interaction. Moreover, by the age of 2, whether the child is producing 200 or 300 distinct words, he or she will be capable of understanding 5 times as many and will typically be treated as an entertaining conversational partner by the principal caregiver. The next stage is called as telegraphic speech, and this stage between 2 and 2.5 years old, the child begins producing a large number of utterances that could be classified as multi-word speech. The silent feature of these utterances ceases to be the number of words, but the variation in word forms that begins to appear. Before we investigate this development, we should note a stage that is described as telegraphic speech. This is characterized by strings of words, lexical morphemes, in phrases and sentences, or sentences such as this shoe all wet, cat drink milk, and daddy go bye-bye. Now, the child has clearly developed some sentences building capacity by this stage and can get the word order correctly. While this type of telegram format speech is being produced, a number of grammatical inflections begin to appear in some of the word forms, and simple prepositions like in, on, at are also used. By the age of 2.5, the child's vocabulary is expanding rapidly, and the child is initiating more talk, while increased physical activity includes running and jumping. By 3, the vocabulary has grown to hundreds of words and pronunciation has become closer to the form of adult language. At this stage, it is worth considering what kind of influence the adults have in the development of the child's speech. Next here we will talk about morphology development. Now by the time a child is 2 and a half years old, he or she is going beyond telegraphic speech forms and incorporating some of the inflectional morphemes that indicate the grammatical function of the nouns and verbs used. The first to appear is usually the ing form or the ing form in expressions such as cat sitting, mommy reading book. The next morphological development is typically the marking of regular plurals with the s form, as in boys, cats. And finally, the regular s marker on third person singular present tense verbs appears. It occurs first with full verbs, comes, looks, reads, sits, and then with auxiliaries does and has and so on. Next is syntax development. The child understands what the adult is saying. He or she just we say on his own expressions which is called as imitation. Forming questions. Now in forming questions, the child's first stage has 2 procedures. Simply add a why form, where, who, when, what, to the beginning of the expression, or utter the expression with a rise of intonation towards the end, as in these examples. Where's Kitty? Good doggy? Where's horse go? Sit chair? In the second stage, more complex expressions can be formed, but by the rising tone strategy continues to be used. It is noticeable that more why forms come into use, as in these examples. What book name? Or you want tea? Why are you smiling? See you doggy? Now these are the way a child between or in this stage form questions. Now in the third stage, here the required movement of the auxiliary in English questions I can have or can I have becomes evident in the child's speech, but doesn't automatically spread to all why question types. In fact, some children beginning school in the 5th or 6th year may still prefer to form why questions, especially with negatives, without the type of inversion found in adult speech. For example, why Kitty cannot instead of why cannot Kitty. Apart from these problems with why questions and continuing trouble with the morphology of verbs, for example, did I coat instead here did I coat instead of did I catch. Stage 3 questions are generally quite close to the adult model, as in these examples. Can I have a piece? Did I coat it? Will you help me? How that opened? And what did you do? Why Kitty cannot stand up? Very close to the adults' models. Forming negatives. In the case of negatives, stage 1 seems to involve a simple strategy of putting no or not at the beginning, as in these examples. No mitten, not a teddy bird, no fall, no sit there. Now in the second stage of forming a negative here, the additional negative forms don't and cannot, do not or cannot, or don't and can't appear. And with no and not are increasingly used in front of the verb rather than at the beginning of the sentence, as in these examples. He no bite you, I don't want it, that not touch, you can't dance. So instead of saying he no bite me, he can't want it, and so on. Now the third stage seems the incorporation of other auxiliary forms such as didn't and won't will while the typical stage 1 forms disappear. A very late acquisition is the negative form isn't, with the result that some stage 2 forms with not instead of isn't continue to be used for quite a long time, as in the following examples: I don't cut it, he not taking it, she won't let go, and this not ice cream. Now these are the forming questions, and let me just summarize what we have or what I have presented today, which was about first language acquisition. We talked about acquisition and the input, and finally before that we talked about also the stages of acquisition, starting with the first stage, cooing and bubbling, moving to the second one word stage, then to the third one 2-word stage, and finally to the fourth one, that is telegraphic speech. And then after that we talked about morphology and the development of morphology, and then after that developing syntax, and then how a child forms questions in 3 stages, and the last point we talked about also was about forming negatives with its stages. I hope that the lecture is simple and easy, and hope to see you again. See you and goodbye.